Welcome to the Christian Atheist, where faith and reason fuse in the incarnation. Episode number 149, The Content of a Scientific Revolution, Part 3. In episode number 85 of the Christian Atheist, we discussed C.S. Lewis's essay, The Funeral of a Great Myth. The great myth Lewis was symbolically laying to rest was the popular notion of evolution. He was, as I argued then, premature in his obituary. Lewis quotes his contemporary, J.B.S. Haldane, a legendary evolutionary biologist and polymath, and one of the first modern scientists to postulate a primordial soup from which life emerged. This is the theory of abiogenesis, of how life came from non-life. Concerned that popular notions of evolution as forward progress were at odds with experimental science, Haldane warned against a serious popular misconception. Quote, "We are inclined to regard progress as the rule in evolution. Actually, it is the exception, and for every case of it, there are 10 of degeneration." End quote. Haldane's dilemma, as it became known to later theorists, presents another serious problem for evolution. It proposes that these vanishingly rare beneficial genetic mutations, that upon which the whole of evolutionary theory depends, face a seemingly insurmountable statistical barrier in being passed on or fixed in the species genome. Put simply, it is nearly a statistical certainty that most beneficial mutations will fail to contribute anything to evolutionary history. Add to this Haldane's acknowledgement that the vast majority of genetic mutations are not beneficial, and we get a serious problem for evolutionary theory, as was evident to even its strongest advocates by the mid-20th century. These problems, and there were many, many more to be discovered, I believe, have only become more dispositive as microbiology opened Darwin's black box. It may be remarked that one of the great triumphs in early modern science was the principle of biogenesis, that life arises exclusively from other life, falsifying the ancient notion of spontaneous generation as superstition. The principle of biogenesis was established experimentally. It thus properly places abiogenesis, spontaneous generation, outside the realm of experimental science. Like evolution itself, it is speculative and theoretical, not experimental. And nothing in experimental science, including the famous Miller-Urey experiment of 1952, has moved it even slightly beyond speculation. Experimental science, therefore, the gold standard of scientific knowledge and progress, flatly contradicts the speculative history of evolution. In any other case, returning to a pre-scientific notion like spontaneous generation would be decried by the scientific community as superstition. Stating the problem simply, no abiogenesis, no evolution. And abiogenesis, as acknowledged by the best and brightest of today's scientists, is simply accepted on faith as an historical miracle. They, of course, won't use the words faith or miracle, but in practice, there is no difference. For all intents and purposes, abiogenesis is statistically impossible. Yet it is believed without evidence as a dogma. Okay, to be fair, it is not without evidence, as scientists all look about and see complex life in all its variety, complexity, and reality. It is evident it originated somewhere, right? Isn't abiogenesis, spontaneous generation, and evolution, then, obvious This amazingly complex world must have come from somewhere. Have faith in one small historical miracle, spontaneous generation or abiogenesis, and the rest of the theory follows by necessity, right? Okay, maybe not that small, but still, you know what I'm saying? The evidence is all around us. Wait, does that sound familiar to anyone? Aren't we theists told, when making a similar argument, repeatedly and with dripping contempt, that belief in an historical miracle is illogical and unscientific? Evolution has been revealed as religious faith. Is the situation for evolutionary theory really this dire? No, it's really not. It's far worse. I despair of being able to convey to you how decisively both reason and evidence have pulled the carpet from under the feet of this theory. Don't believe me? Let's take one relatively recent book, first printed in 2011, by the celebrated evolutionary biologist Eugene Koonin, The Logic of Chance, the Nature and Origin of Biological Evolution. In Appendix B of his book, Koonin estimates the naturalistic probability of life getting started sufficiently to begin evolutionary processes. Quote, in other words, even in this toy model that assumes a deliberately inflated rate of RNA production, the probability that a coupled translation replication emerges by chance in a single O region is a probability of less than 10 to the negative 1018. Obviously, this version of the breakthrough stage can be considered only in the context of a universe with an infinite, or at the very least, extremely vast number of O regions. Allow me to translate. Koonin proposes that even when he deliberately inflates the production of RNA, increasing the probability of a successful outcome, in the proposed RNA world, which itself faces similarly improbable odds of arising, from which the necessary processes of genetic information replication and translation into cellular life could come. The chance of success in any given universe like ours is less than 10 to the negative 1018. To try to put a number like that into perspective, think of this. 10 to the 18 is a quintillion. What is a quintillion? It is a million trillions. Remember saying that as kids? Well, here we are as adults, contemplating the likelihood that two fundamental systems of life will emerge naturalistically from favorable conditions in a universe like ours. And one of the brightest evolutionary theorists of our time doesn't say that the probability is a million trillions against it happening. No, that's way too rosy of an estimate. A million trillions is 1 followed by 18 zeros. Koonin estimates the probability of life emerging anywhere in our universe as less than 1 followed by 1,018 zeros. If I write out a quintillion as a 1 followed by 18 zeros, it takes up about 1/3 of a line in 12-point font on my screen. By contrast, 10 to the 1018 takes up more than half a page, about 15 and a half lines. Scientists estimate that there are 10 to the 80 atoms in the universe. Koonin calls these odds, in perhaps the greatest understatements of all time, staggeringly improbable and vanishingly small. We should call it statistically impossible. Koonin, however, does not call it that. His confidence in evolutionary theory never wavers. Eugene Koonin is a very smart man. How can he believe so strongly? Truly, I say unto you, I have not found such faith among the faithful. How does he rationalize or sustain this faith in the face of such overwhelming odds? Enter eternal cosmic inflation and the multiverse. Turning our attention now to the second part of the quote from the appendix given above. Obviously, this version of the breakthrough stage can be considered only in the context of a universe with an infinite, or at the very least, extremely vast number of O regions. Translation: it is obvious that believing in the emergence of life by purely naturalistic processes in our universe, or any given universe, is a statistical loser. Yes, it may be nearly infinitely improbable that our universe evolved life. However, what is astronomically improbable in finite time and space becomes all but certain given infinite space and infinite time. For our philosophy listeners who are interested, this is a version of Friedrich Nietzsche's doctrine of eternal recurrence. In turn, he borrowed it from the Stoics of ancient Greece, and not a truly new proposal. Look it up. It is also a metaphysical assumption that underlies all of modern secular science, even if oftentimes only implicitly. What made Darwin's notion of evolution, quote, by numerous successive slight modifications, plausible, was the assumption, the faith in an unimaginably long period of time. But it turns out that when we do the math, as Koonin does, the 13.8 billion years currently considered as the age of our universe is but a drop in the ocean of the time required statistically for abiogenesis and evolution to occur. And to be honest with the numbers, the drop in the ocean analogy vastly understates the improbability. What is a self-respecting evolutionary scientist to do? Well, go back to the playbook and ask the science genie for more time. If the 13.8 billion years postulated to make room for the evolution of life isn't enough, just tack on whatever it takes to make it plausible again. And what it takes is infinite space and infinite time. So be it, says the genie. As C.S. Lewis said, if science had not met the imaginative need, science would not have been so popular. But probably every age gets, within certain limits, the science it desires. The problem here, though, is that materialist scientists are sounding more and more like supernaturalists, aren't they? Using deus ex machina strategies to avoid a difficult confrontation with reality? How exactly is the postulation of an infinite space and infinite time different from the supernatural notion of God as eternal being itself? Given what we are understanding about Koonin's views, we should not be surprised to encounter this statement in the preface, speaking volumes about the nature of evolutionary science as ruling paradigm. Quote, this common sense principle has served our purposes exceedingly well, and, I believe, converted me into an evolutionary biologist for the rest of my days. What I mean is not so much theoretical knowledge, but rather an indelible feeling of the absolute centrality and essentiality of evolution in biology. It is indeed a conversion and a faith built upon, quote, an indelible feeling of the absolute centrality and essentiality of evolution in biology. This faith is not without reason or evidence. Indeed, it is hyper-rational. but it most definitely is sustained by an unshakable faith in the face of seemingly impossible odds. At the risk of caricature, I would like to take liberty with the words of Puddleglum in C.S. Lewis's The Silver Chair when confronting the Green Witch. Imagine a conversation between a committed intelligent design scientist presenting the Christian worldview and how Koonin, playing the part of Puddleglum, might respond. There's one thing more to be said, even so. Suppose evolutionary scientists have only dreamed, or made up all those things. Eternal inflation, the multiverse, and evolution itself. Suppose we have. Then all I can say is that, in that case, the made-up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this Christian God is the true reality. Well, it strikes me as a pretty poor one. And that's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just scientists making up a game, if you're right. But evolutionary scientists playing a game can make a play world, which licks your real world hollow. That's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on evolution's side, even if there isn't any evolution to follow. I'm going to live as like an evolutionary scientist as I can, even if there isn't any evolution. Lest I be accused too vociferously of caricaturing Koonin's position, consider these words from Appendix A. The dialectics of this situation is that the evolutionary narratives certainly are oversimplified myths. At present, we hardly can give up these stories, precisely because they are necessary means for the advancement of research. It seems important not to forget that evolutionary narratives effectively are semantic devices that are constructed to structure and simplify our thinking about evolution and to facilitate the generation of hypotheses. These narratives should be prudently distrusted, and by no account should be construed as accurate representations of reality. But Koonin and other evolutionary theorists do believe or embrace them, and Koonin enjoins others to do the same. Quote, "Our best chance to understand evolution is to embrace the complementarity of the physical, theoretical, and historical meta-narratives of evolution as a lasting, intrinsic feature of evolutionary biology, rather than a temporary situation caused by the imperfection of theory." End quote. Noting philosopher of science Karl Popper's critique that evolutionary theory might not be science at all because it is not falsifiable, Koonin points out that Popper later conceded evolutionary theory's value as it gave rise to falsifiable predictions. Koonin continues, "I believe there is considerable merit in Popper's position. It is as true of the postmodern synthesis, which he formulates in this book, of evolutionary biology, as it was of Darwin's theory that falsification of the entire conceptual framework, or all of its propositions, is hardly feasible. However, its general metaphysical character notwithstanding, the theory yields many specific falsifiable propositions, especially given the rapidly expanding data sets of genomics and systems biology." Koonin essentially makes the plea in this book that evolutionary theory remains a viable faith position, a presuppositional platform for scientific investigation, despite the very serious problems it faces. At the end of chapter 12, he says this, "Given all these major difficulties, it appears prudent to seriously consider radical alternatives for the origin of life." He means, of course, embracing the multiverse and eternal inflation cosmologically. We are to have open minds. But the one radical proposal which solves all of his quandaries, his difficulties, and his improbabilities with elegant theoretical simplicity, and is both highly rational and in accord with all the evidence, intelligent design, is not only not considered, but not even considerable. Theism generally, and Christianity more particularly, like evolutionary theory, is truly not falsifiable. But this is not because it is a story, a narrative, or a paradigm, but because it is verifiable. It is reality. It is true. Indeed, it will be verified in the eternity which Koonin requires, but radically misunderstands. Listeners, have faith, like Eugene Koonin, who believes in the face of statistical impossibility. Just be sure that your faith is not in the same mythology he claims as his own. Believe in reality, not a man-made myth. Believe in God and His Word. I am a Christian, with the searching and skeptical mind of an atheist. I don't want to believe anything that isn't true. I know both sides of the looking glass, and I know them with open eyes. I choose Christ's side. I invite you to join me from wherever you stand before the looking glass. That's this week's episode. Thanks for listening. And remember, you can have your religious cake and eat it too. You can have reason, respect for science, a 21st century worldview, and be a Christian.